Hello and welcome to part 1 in our series, A Visual Guide to Institutional IP. Institutional innovation is an exciting field to be involved with, but understanding the nuances of how it works can be a heady and complex task. So to make this topic more accessible, we decided to use this tree as a metaphor. We start with drivers of campus IP policy and innovation as the roots. These roots feed or inform the trunk, which represents the IP laws and policies on your campus. Of course, the trunk leads to the branches, which represent how IP policy is implemented on your campus, as well as how you educate your campus community about IP policy. The fruits and flowers are the outcomes, those beautiful ideas and products your campus community develops. Now in this video, we're going to discuss drivers of campus IP policy and innovation. As you're probably aware, intellectual property, generated both on and off campus, is a huge economic driver, accounting for a large percentage of GDP and employment in the US. Universities are major contributors of IP, so it's critical that campuses develop IP policies that serve to enhance IP output and thus contribute to a healthy economy. When developing IP policies, institutions must weigh not only the potential economic impact of their policies, but also the trends on campus, like the goals and mission of the campus, and the perspectives of the students they serve. This is a fine balancing act that we hope to provide some insight into. So let's review the material we'll be covering in this video. First, we'll discuss economic drivers in the industry and at the national level. Then we'll discuss the cultural trends that affect IP on campus, potential challenges to campus IP output, global trends that affect campus IP, and finally, the outcomes of all these drivers and trends. We'll conclude with some key takeaways, as well as where to go for more information. Let's start with economic drivers. There are a number of key economic forces right now driving record levels of IP creation and consumption. Economic demand for intellectual property, both here in the US and abroad, is flourishing. The US Chamber of Commerce recently dubbed IP the economic currency of the 21st century. Since 2008, the number of patents granted worldwide to US entities has increased at significantly above market rates. So too have the number of US copyright registrations. Industries that rely heavily on IP, known as IP-intensive industries, now account for over a third of US GDP and employ over a third of American workers. These IP-intensive industries amazingly account for 3/4 of all US exports. Economic and job growth in IP-intensive industries is also significantly outpacing overall US growth in these areas. It's clear that IP is shaping our economic future. There are various cultural trends that impact IP creation on campuses. These include the growth in access to student entrepreneurial education experiences and the rise of dorm room inventions. Kuratko explains in his 2005 paper, The Emergence of Entrepreneurship Education, Development Trends and Challenges. The number of colleges and universities that offer courses related to entrepreneurship has grown from a handful in the 1970s to over 1,600 in 2005. In addition to the increase in formal entrepreneurial education opportunities, mainstream access to sophisticated technologies has dramatically lowered the resource barrier for creating IP. Whereas in the past it may have taken significant funding and resources to create IP on campus, nowadays, students have the potential to create valuable IP while sitting in their dorm rooms, in their pajamas. This is demonstrated by the steady increase over the past 10 years in internet connectivity among those under 25. This trend has been pervasive in both developed and developing nations and shows no signs of slowing down. This trend has had the biggest impact on digital content areas like software engineering. Not only is it often easier to create digital content, it's also easier to protect this content as, unlike in other fields, both copyright and patent protection are possible. In addition, as far as patents are concerned, digital content is more easily reduced to practice. In legal terms, This refers to the technical requirement that an invention be sufficiently developed prior to patent approval. For example, an app that a gifted student creates for a mobile platform would be ready to use almost immediately upon its completion and would require nothing more than a laptop to create. It's reasonable to assume that a reduced barrier to entry for students would increase their interest in IP creation, and this indeed seems to be the trend, particularly in undergraduate students, whose exposure to the internet and technology at a younger age seems to have made them more interested in technology related to IP. In a 2014 research paper by Deval-Coutil et al., tech transfer officers interviewed explained that students are asking more questions of a general nature about intellectual property and about whether they have some obligation to the institution under its policies. It's important to consider carefully how cultural and technological trends like this drive policy change. In the last section of this video, we'll discuss solutions that some institutions have implemented in response to these trends. Despite all the positive economic drivers and cultural trends promoting campus IP output, many challenges still remain. Here are some obstacles institutions should be aware of that might hinder campus innovation. The first challenge is federal research funding. Despite the fact that overall research funding is increasing, thanks to private and institutional investment, federal research funding has plateaued following decades of unprecedented growth. In the wake of the U.S. Budget Control Act of 2011, federal spending on research has virtually frozen and even declined slightly in 2012. Federal research funding, as you can see here, has traditionally focused on life science spending, so its decline will hit this area of IP the hardest. As a result of this decline, institutions should consider re-examining their IP policies and practices in order to become less reliant on government contracts and embrace a broader, more modern range of IP creation scenarios, for example, student-generated IP. Another negative indicator is one that many faculty are well aware of. There are insufficient students graduating from U.S. institutions with degrees in science or engineering. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, the number of graduates in science and engineering in many developed markets, including the US, is not large enough to support the IP economy. In WIPO's ranking of STEM grads per capita, the US comes in 77th, whereas it ranks 5th in their Global Innovation Index. On-campus tech transfer offices supervise the generation, management, and commercialization of campus-generated IP. The support they provide is critical to a successful campus IP culture. However, these offices are traditionally underfunded, and despite the increase in IP activity on campus, the size of these offices has shown negligible or no growth in the last 5 years. This trend will likely need to change if campuses are to keep up with the times. The final challenge is the confusion and mistrust among the campus community, particularly among students, surrounding the way in which campuses manage IP. IP policies are complex and confusing to pretty much anyone. Often both students and faculty are nervous about how the various policies will impact them and their inventions. This quote, taken from a 2014 research paper by Deval-Coutil et al., captures the essence of these concerns. There is a lot of sort of mistrust. Are you going to own my company? Are you going to charge me huge amounts of money? All that kind of stuff. This lack of trust and fear of exploitation creates a gap between innovation potential and actual real-world results. Education and clarity are key. It would be a shame for students to suppress their own creativity and ambition because of misunderstanding. Not only are students confused, but oftentimes tech transfer staff, the very people responsible for managing campus IP, also experience confusion surrounding their campus IP policy. I think it's understood that if they're paid by the university and are working specifically on that problem or project, that would be covered. If they use university labs, that would be covered. It's not clear to me that if they use a computer lab that's open to anybody, whether or not that would be covered. As technology continues to flatten the world we live in, global trends are increasingly affecting how institutions manage and promote IP. It is no longer adequate to take only the domestic trends into account, and hasn't been for some time. IP generated at US institutions is even more valuable now than ever because of the global opportunities that support it. But along with increasing IP value comes complexity. One of the most significant challenges affecting foreign IP are differences in international IP laws. While many countries have modeled their IP systems after the US, in accordance with treaties and other international agreements, many key differences still remain. For example, in many other countries, if too much information about an invention leaks prior to patenting, unintentional or otherwise, the opportunity to file a patent may be lost. The trend of globalization will make situations like this more frequent and cause others to arise as well. Despite significant differences in IP laws around the world, US entities are increasingly committed to investing in emerging IP markets globally. Not surprisingly, US foreign IP investment activity is most pronounced in countries and regions experiencing some of the most significant technological development over recent years, for example, Southeast Asian markets. As evidenced by this diagram from WIPO, US inventors are increasingly pursuing international patent protection as part of their IP strategy. As institutions continue to evaluate their IP policies and procedures, campus leaders should carefully weigh both the challenges and opportunities available beyond US borders. So what are some of the outcomes of these economic and cultural forces campuses are experiencing? Earlier we discussed how federal research funding is declining. In spite of this, survey data shows that over the past few years, particularly as the US economic recovery has progressed, growth of innovation and entrepreneurship activity at US institutions has outpaced research funding. Categories where growth has occurred include invention disclosures generated, US patents issued and filed, startup companies formed, and IP contracts executed. This would seem to indicate, as previously recommended, that institutions are embracing a broader, more modern range of IP creation scenarios, for example, student-generated IP, a strategy they should continue to pursue. In addition to fostering a wider range of IP creation scenarios, campuses are also modifying their IP policies and practices to capitalize on these new IP opportunities. For example, many campuses are proactively relaxing and clarifying their student IP policies in response to a need to reduce the confusion associated with IP generation and enhance IP output. As one faculty member explained, our undergraduate invention and entrepreneurship environment and cultures were being directly and indirectly stymied without explicitly encouraging policies. In response, they developed and successfully implemented a pro-student policy. These more relaxed policies, particularly for undergraduate students, reduced the burden on understaffed and underfunded tech transfer offices. By limiting the policing of undergraduate students, tech transfer officers are better able to handle the workload. A tech transfer officer quoted in the 2014 research paper by Deval Katil et al. Also explained that student projects that relate to coursework are student property. We only work with them if they ask us to and are willing to voluntarily assign to the university. In addition to relaxing the student IP policy, some institutions also decide to proactively help the students with the IP process. Another tech transfer officer explained, "We have an exclusive license agreement which is very attractive to an undergraduate startup company. Essentially, we will file a provisional patent application. They can take this to any law firm they wish. We grant them an exclusive license to it. They owe us nothing, no reports or any royalties, unless they have sales over $1 million in any 1 year. Then they owe us a 1% royalty and reports thereafter." This approach serves to promote a positive relationship with the students, which may help to foster positive alumni relations later on. Several institutions marry their policy changes with outreach efforts to inform students and others about policy. Efforts to create materials that put policy changes in layperson terms are often helpful, as well as integrating policy education into curriculum. The trust these kinds of approaches fosters and the communication lines it opens may also help to address issues associated with international policy law. We'll learn more about these strategies in the third video of the series, covering IP implementation and outreach. This concludes our Key Drivers video, part 1 of 3 in our series, A Visual Guide to Institutional IP. We've shown the drivers and trends that both positively and negatively affect IP policies on campus, as well as some of the strategies for optimizing campus IP output and culture. For additional information, we encourage you to consult the supplemental information we've provided, along with the other visual guides from this series, IP Law and Policy and IP Outreach and Education.